Speaking of the saints, now I'm getting to the saint I want to highlight today. I just recently learned, just this past week, I learned about Saint Crispin and Saint Crispian. They were twin brothers. How I learned about this, I was reading an article actually in the Epoch Times, and it was talking about the Battle of, I think it was the one after Hastings. This is like old history, in France and England were fighting, and the battle happened on St. Crispin's Day. And I was like, who's St. Crispin? So that was my first thought. Who's St. Crispin? And then I looked it up, and there's apparently a famous speech for you literature buffs. I'm not a literature buff, um, but in Henry V by Shakespeare, there's uh, a famous battle speech, which is very inspiring about a man's duty to fight, and to fight for his friend. And actually the phrase band of brothers comes from that speech, which I'm sure is why they called it Band of Brothers, the movie with um, actually, I'm not sure. I haven't seen that movie, but the Band of Brothers. So that quote comes from this Henry V speech, where Henry V inspires his men. But the battle was fought on St. Crispin's Day. And I was thinking, I wonder if St. Crispin and his brother would have been lost to history if that had not been written by Shakespeare. Just a question. So let's look up Saint Crispin today. So Saint Crispin and Saint Crispian, this is according to the Catholic News Agency. The feast day is on October 25th. And Saint Crispin and Crispian were brothers. Together they evangelized Gaul in the middle of the 3rd century. So this is like 250 AD. Working from Soissons, they preached the streets by day and made shoes by night. Their charity, piety, and contempt of material things impressed the locals, and many were converted to Christianity. The brothers refused to yield to the persecution of the faith, who wanted Crispin and Crispian to apostatize, which means to renounce their faith. They were both beheaded in Rome about 286 AD. They are the patrons of cobblers, glove makers, lace workers, leather workers, saddleback. Anyway, list goes on. A great church was built at Soissons in the 6th century in their honor. And then let's see what else here. So they were beheaded. Born, and this is the Wikipedia entry. It says, born to a noble Roman family in the 3rd century A.D., Crispin and Crispian fled persecution for their faith, ending up at Soissons, where they preached Christianity to the Gauls while making shoes by at night. It is stated that they were twin brothers. They earned enough by their trade to support themselves and also to aid the poor. Their success attracted the ire of Rictus Verus, the governor of Belgic Gaul, who had them tortured and thrown into the river with millstones around their neck. Though they survived, they were beheaded by the emperor 286. And they were venerated. The feast day is October 25th. And it says that this feast day was removed from the Roman Catholic Church Universal Liturgical Calendar following the Second Vatican Council. The saints were also commemorated on that day in a most recent edition of Roman Church's Martyrology. So, interesting. As you can see, I found this etching where they are preaching the gospel to the locals, and they're in business. So that's an interesting dual ministry, evangelism and business. Perhaps those two things go together. So, the life of the saints with Brother Matthew. Da, 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 da. Or actually, no, what I should do is I should have an audio that goes, oh, kind of thing with the Gregorian chants. That'd be pretty great. So here's another picture of them, the cobblers here. Yeah, so that was pretty cool. So yeah, what I wanted to point out, actually, what I was thinking about here is Saint Crispin and Saint Crispian. They evangelized the Gauls, so they were sent into a pagan people. It looks like persecution kind of drives the church around, pushes the church out of its comfort zone, right? And then it says they preached the streets by day and they made the shoes by night. So that's really what inspired me. They preached by day and they made shoes by night. What would it look like? No, let's just dream here a little bit. What would it look like if God did such a move today where the church, that we made our business evangelism? Think about it. What if by day we did the work of an evangelist? That's what was it 2 Timothy 4:5 says, do the work of an evangelist. What if we did the work of an evangelist? 2 Timothy 4:5, I was right. But be sober in all things, endure hardship or affliction, do the work of an evangelist, fulfill your ministry. What if during the day believers began to do this? What if, just imagine in your city, what if you began to do the work of an evangelist all day, every day? That was your job. It was to go evangelize. Can you imagine? We do evangelism here, and it's important to practice evangelism. It's important to practice evangelism, but sometimes it's like 30 minutes a day, and you're like, wow, that's not a lot of time, right? But these guys, they would work all day, and then they would go for the Lord, and then in the evening, they would do business, right? They would make their shoes or whatever. So isn't that amazing? Can you imagine if just two people, brothers or one person began to do this? You could reach an entire city if you were evangelists. An entire city. Like I think of my city, Longmont, 100,000 people. Within a year, 2 years, if the whole church began to function like evangelists, man, God would do a great work. Praise the Lord.